Welcome to today's episode of the Declutter Hub podcast, your channel for super easy, no-nonsense advice on how to declutter and organise your home. Please welcome your hosts, professional organisers Ingrid Jansen and Lesley Spellman.
Hello and welcome listeners to episode 15 of the Declutter Hub podcast. I'm Ingrid.
And I'm Lesley.
If you have clutter and want to sort it out, this is the show for you. In today's episode, Lesley and I are talking all about paperwork. And we are going to talk about how long do you need to keep your paperwork for? Now, this is always a very big question that everybody asks us all the time. I know, how about you, Lesley, but my clients ask it all the time to me. How long do I need to keep this piece of paperwork for? So that's why we decided to do a podcast about it. So what do you think?
Well, first of all, I think that paperwork is my absolute favourite thing to declutter. So I think it's really, and I think it's your's too. So I like little excited Duracell bunnies podcast. But yeah, I think the first thing that we need to say is there's no hard and fast rules about how long to keep anything. And so what I always say is everything is about your own situation at home, depending on what kind of family you've got. Are you on your own? Have you got kids? Have you got medical issues? There's so many things that come into play when deciding what sort of things that you need to keep. Have you had anything complicated going on in your life with council tax banding? There are so many things that are going to take you slightly off the norm. So what we're going to talk about today, I think we're going to go through things. What we're not here to do is advise. And I think the most important thing for us to say is, please don't take everything that we say at face value and go and chucking everything away and then blaming us when you need it in a few years. But we're just going to talk about some of the psychology of why we keep things for a certain periods of time, and talk about, maybe thinking about things in a slightly different way. And talk about our experiences, really, aren't we, with paperwork?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And also, I think I want to add that it's different in every country as well, because we know we've got listeners all over the world. Of course, we are based in the UK, so we will give quite a lot of advice on paperwork of what we think, how long we should keep it. But maybe if you're in Holland, or if you're in the United States or in Canada, or wherever you're listening, double check and make sure that you've got the right paperwork and that you keep the right things. So we are here to talk about it, but definitely double check at home what you want to do with that.
I think this will also be a really good one for people to put in the comments as well, and to ask us questions, and then we could maybe give it, put a little bit more meat on the bones, as it were, if people have got specific questions.
Okay.
So let's get started. How long do we keep things? There's so many different categories of paperwork, aren't there? And it kind of it kind of condenses with a paperless society, doesn't it? But equally, it grows and grows and seems to become a little bit more complicated. Mm-hmm. So what sort of things do you think is important for us to talk about, Ingrid?
Well, I think we need to definitely talk about important documents. What are they and how long do you need to keep them? Because I think for me, an important document is a passport and a birth certificate and a marriage certificate if you're married. And I would keep them forever. So I think we definitely can draw a line that we should keep that for a long time, shouldn't we, Lesley?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's some things that are an absolute no-brainer that we know that we need to keep. But in terms of categorizing things as an important document, what I would say is if you go through the decluttering process and it's useful to you, it's an important document that needs to be kept probably in the same way as everything else. Mm-hmm. And so, there's lots of things, insurance certificates, things like that don't need to be kept for your whole life, but they do need to be kept somewhere safe for a defined period, and then it needs to be regenerated and you need to swap it over when a new one comes in, and so on. So what we're talking about here is that everything is important, but obviously some things are more important than others, I guess, in terms of you needing them to sort of continue on with your life, or to travel, or whatever that, or to rent somewhere. There's different things that you absolutely need and that are no-brainers, and many more things that you can make a judgment call over it yourself.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what kind of paperwork does pop into your head when you think about categorization and keeping it?
Well, I think the first one that people, and there's quite a lot of volume in this as well, is bank statements and credit card statements. Mm-hmm. So now obviously there's a big move, and has been, working with my clients, there's a big decrease in the amount of people that get paper statements through at all now. I think most people are trying to use apps and go paperless, which is brilliant. And I think we really need to think about that. Society is trying to drive us to be paperless, and there's a message in that, that actually we can be paperless to a large degree with some things. And so it's important to sort of know. And the reason why we can be paperless is that we can get that information from somewhere else. But equally, we need to be technologically capable of finding that information and comfortable with that. So for some people are a little bit more nervous about online banking from a security perspective. And so, and there are some people that don't use a computer. And so they need to get those bank statements in a paper base. So that's where it's all about where you feel comfortable and what fits in with your lifestyle. So again, there's no hard and fast rules about how long you keep bank statements. But what I will say is think very carefully about what you do with that information. So if you do get a paper-based statement, what do you actually do? Does it just come in and sit in the envelope and never get opened and never get looked at? Or do you painstakingly go through that statement every time it comes in and tick it off and cross-reference everything that you've spent and checks that you've paid and so on to make sure? I mean, I do that on an app. I think when I've got an app and I go into it quite regularly, just to sort of keep a check. I think if you go into it every couple of days, you think, oh yeah, I did that on Tuesday and I spent that on, so you can kind of keep a mental check of it, can't you? And see if anything looks unusual. So bank statements, you can absolutely go paperless on bank statements if you want to, because that information is available for the 7 years from your bank, for most banks that is.
Yeah.
And credit card statements are normally available for 4 months.
Okay. I think also you've got now the crossover between still having paper statements that are much, much older and the new statements being paperless and people kind of being unsure what they want. They're still deciding what is the best way, and that they're not sure if the crossover was done correctly. You know what I mean? That they want to make sure that everything from the bank in paper is still in the bank. So you need maybe some time to investigate a little bit if what you have online tallies up with what you have at home. And then you can maybe feel more comfortable in letting your paper statements go if you can see that they're online and you can find them.
Oh, so you mean there's a crossover?
Yeah.
So you mean do both at the same time, have a little bit of a sort of crossover period where you have not a paperless a statement that comes online, and the paper one, and make sure that you're happy with the sort of transition from one to the other. No, that's a really good idea. And then once you feel comfortable with it, then you can sort of move forward. I think it's fair to say that a lot of people don't go back, to do paperwork is a big project, isn't it? It takes a long time. And so many people have just gathered statements along the way, and they may not get them now, but they might have them from 10 years ago. Do you know what I mean? And so I think it's important to look as a project and to sort of work and really think about what to do with that information.
Yeah. Utility bills, I would love to talk to you about, because of course we've got your gas, your water, your electricity, maybe your internet and your TV. That's kind of the things that I see as utility bills.
And phones as well, mobile phones and phone bills.
Yeah. For me, a bit of a strange one, which is I see as utility bill, but isn't really, I think, is a council tax bill.
Okay.
So I see it as utility bill, but I find it a bit of an odd one out. The rest, I'm much more flexible in letting the paperwork go, but I actually find council tax bills quite important. So I don't know why, but maybe because the council send it to me. I think, oh, and it's only one A4 a year. So I think, okay, well, I can keep 5 of those or 6 or 7. That feels good instead of maybe only keeping 1 or 2.
I mean, I'm definitely, I like to sort of pare things down to the bone a little bit if I can. So I would look at that and say, right, there has to be, if you're going to keep more than one of them, actually the latest one is the only one that's really relevant. It gives you all the information about your banding on there. It has all of the costings and so on. It has the information that you need. It's also there as an ID. Like a lot of people use a council tax statements for an ID. Yeah. So I wouldn't keep anything other than the current one unless there's been a problem, and in your home whether or not there's a problem in your area with council tax banding and things like that you can go back and look at. At some point, or where there's something generally a little bit contentious, or there's been some, if maybe you've had benefits that have paid your council tax. And so it's been a little bit more, not messy, but more complicated than normal. So yeah, pare it down if you can, but you will know whether there's something more complicated than the norm. But always remember, of course, that if you need that council tax information and you've not got it, that's a simple phone call to the council to get that, and they will resend it out to you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good point. And like gas, water, electricity bills, Lesley, how long would you say you would keep those?
I mean, I think, again, we've definitely got a crossover. I mean, the utility companies are definitely pushing us all to go online and giving us financial rewards for doing so. And so I think certainly most people I work with are at least online for the utility bills. So I think, but if they're not, I think, again, it's about looking at what am I going to do with that information? I think over the past few years, something that's really helpful has been where they send an annual usage summary out to you, whether that's online or paper-based, because that's something that you can then use to to try and get your bills down, to change provider and swap your bills over. So I tend to keep, if it's paper based, I tend to keep the annual usage summary plus the latest statement.
Mm-hmm. I think that's also really helpful, because then you've got your account number and a phone number you can call. So I would always keep at least one piece of paper where you can find your number, so you're not reliant on your computer to start digging through or trying to log in, and maybe you lose your login or something. So have something of a hard copy with your customer number. I think that's
absolutely.
Really helpful.
So even if I don't keep anything, even if you've not got anything paper-based, because quite often if you've gone completely online with that company, you won't have anything unless you've printed it off. So I have little L folders that I use all the time within paperwork, and I just put a sticker on there and say, this is the username for this account, this is who it's with, and this is when it started, just so you've got an idea, because we tend to change over quite a lot on utilities now, don't we? And you kind of forget where you've got to and things like that. So yeah, utility bills, don't keep too many, again, unless there's something contentious and some difficulty that you've had with payments in the past. And I would always keep the closing statement. A good, if you do swap over, maybe keep the closing statement from your previous provider.
Yeah, good point. Mortgage paperwork or rental agreements, kind of house stuff. If we're continuing kind of on the utility, we now move to mortgage paperwork or rental agreements. That's, I think, a pretty important one as well.
Yeah, and I think people, from a mortgage perspective, people really do, they think it's really important and something that they need to keep. Actually, I would look at that and say, right, what is that information going to do for you? You absolutely need to keep your deed of mortgage. So your initial kind of contract that you have with your mortgage company needs to be kept. I only keep the latest statement for my mortgage because that's the most up-to-date version, and that gives you a snapshot of where you are now. If you are somebody that sort of goes over the detail mortgage and loves to see where you've gone, if you're somebody that's lucky enough to be able to pay some extra off your mortgage or something like that, a lot of people really want to see the progress they have made. So and it depends if you're that kind of person. I am not, and I will look, I just want to know where I am today. But, so depending on where you are. The other thing that's really important that a lot of people don't know with mortgage statements, and you'll know this if you've applied for a mortgage recently, quite often a new mortgage provider will ask you for details, and it's only the account numbers and the mortgage companies. They'll ask you for previous mortgages that you've held, so you have to keep those numbers. Not quite sure what they do if you didn't have them, but so I'll always encourage any of my clients or anybody that I'm working with to keep a record of just the number and the provider.
Yeah. And also with rental agreements, I would probably have the current rental agreement, maybe your previous rental agreement, or maybe a letter that you were a good tenant, so you can show that to a future if you want to rent another house. I think that's kind of really important paperwork to keep. And also a rental agreement, it's very clear then exactly who's responsible for what. So definitely keep that signed copy in your filing system. That's, I think, very important.
It's just having that balance, isn't it, Ingrid, between knowing what's, you don't want to leave yourself unstuck and give yourself a load of hassle if you've got to do something in the future. But equally, what you don't want to keep is every single thing that you've ever had, because then the volumes are so big that you can't get to what you need to get to. So it's about, having it in an organised, categorised way and knowing actually that bit of information may be useful to me in the future, but not worrying too much about it and knowing what you can get from people and things like that. So that's mortgage statements.
Okay. Maybe then let's move on to things like insurance. And I'm thinking about home insurance because we're talking about homes. So maybe home insurance, travel insurance, car insurance.
There's loads of insurances really. There's pet insurance and, there's like any number of insurances that you can get. Again, I'm quite sort of draconian in these matters and think actually the insurance that I had last year is almost completely irrelevant unless I've probably done my price comparison at the time that I've changed over. And so therefore I'm in this and this is where I'm at. So I'll just keep my current insurance document. I think it's important if you've had any issues along the way. So if you've had any claims, I think you have to keep the details. Normally it will say if you've had any claims within the last 5 years. So it's important to keep any record of anything contentious really in that 5 years that may come up then if you want to reapply for mortgage. Not mortgage. If you want to reapply for another insurance policy, things like that. I think but other than that, just keep the current copy, of your mortgage insurance document.
Okay. Then I was thinking about that kind of links very good into car paperwork because we kind of talked about car insurance a little bit, but of course there's more stuff connected to a car or a motorbike, or maybe you've got a really fancy bike that was expensive and you need to have. So you probably have several things that involve a car as well. So you probably have your MOT paperwork, either you're buying or you're leasing of the car, your service, your maintenance. So I'm always interested. I'm thinking, when was the last time I had my tires replaced? And I want to go back and go, oh, wow, that was 3 years ago or 2 years ago or 5 years ago, however long it was. And I can see how the wear and tear is as well of the car. So and of course, if your car is newer, you will have far less paperwork than when your car is older. But I think it's important to have some of that stuff.
It's very much, it depends, doesn't it, again, on how old your car is, whether you've got a service agreement with the garage, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's really important to keep a full service history if you can.
Yeah.
Of everything. That would always be categorised for me. Obviously, the current insurance document, the sales paperwork as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's important to keep. I always keep the. It's like a change of owner. It says, you are no longer the registered keeper of this vehicle. So it kind of proves, just in case anybody decides to go around joyriding in your previous car or something like that. I think, that's not my car anymore. And so there's sort of things like that, really. So, there's loads. And the other thing that I think is probably useful to mention, of course, is you do have to do a bit of diarising as well, because your MOT isn't something that they tell you about when it runs out. So you need to put that in your diary to remind yourself to go back and do another MOT. Because all of a sudden, your MOT runs out, you're unaware because it's piled on, it's under a pile of paperwork. You've paid your insurance, but your insurance is invalid because you've not got an MOT. So that's where sort of calendar management comes in a little bit with MOT as well.
Yeah. Then I thought, when we were talking about paperwork, I thought, we've talked briefly about bank statements, but we haven't really touched upon children's finances yet. So I've got a little bank account for my children that I keep some paperwork for. So they've got a separate folder with some of their paperwork. So do you keep stuff like that?
I do. And, everybody who's listened knows that I've also got a 22-year-old and a 20-year-old, and I still keep some of that financial stuff because I kind of want to make sure that it's there. I do keep that because they gather little things along the way sometimes, don't they? Some people might open, get them a little bond or something for christening or, whatever that might be. So they do gather financial stuff along the way. Mm-hmm. And then, once they I've got a file for each of my children basically for finances. It's not huge, but the kids absolutely are paperless on bank statements and probably couldn't care less about what their current balance is and whether they've got enough money to go to McDonald's on Saturday. That's about as much as they're worried about. But yes, and I've got something because that's just evolved. At the end of the day, I've had that since the kids were really little, and just some things that are in there, and the kids know that it's in the filing cabinet, and they have not got filing cabinets of their own at the moment.
Yeah. I know. The other thing that I keep from my kids in my filing system are their school reports and I actually could put their certificates in there too, but I've got a separate box file for their certificates. But actually, it could live in my paperwork system as well. But their school reports I also keep together, and I can kind of follow up and have a file for that as well, and keep an eye on that so that doesn't get put somewhere else. I kind of try to put all the paperwork together in one place.
It's an interesting one, isn't it, with the school reports, because it's, we want to keep them. I've kept all my kids' school reports all their life, but it's when does it stop becoming a useful document that you need to refer back to, and when does it become a memory and a sentimental item? So I think after a certain number of years, 2 or 3 years maybe, then they become part of their sentimental box, and then that's them more for them to come back to. But and again, it depends on what's going on with your child. If you've had issues at school, if there's anything that you want to refer back to, you want to see the progress that they have made, maybe you want to compare one child to another in terms of the progress or where they were at that stage, is going to very much determine how you feel about those school reports and what you're going to do with them. But what people do is they'll keep that, when you've got a slip on the back that you've got to send back, or you've got an envelope, and we find all those, so take that bulk away and just keep the actual report. You don't need to keep this is what a 5 is and this is what a 4 is, and I don't even know what the things are these days, and every school is different.
Yeah.
But, you don't necessarily need to keep the key, because that's just one more piece of paper that you don't need in there that's sort of cluttering things up.
Yeah.
Just actual report, I would say.
I was actually, now you mentioned slips that you need to return back and explanation. Actually, something popped into my head. What I find a lot in medical paperwork from my clients is the explanation how they have to drive to the hospital. And I'm like, they send it with every appointment letter. They send the same thing. And I'm like, I think they know by now how to get there. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's probably part of their procedure that they have to send that out. But I'm like, I think you know by now how to get there. So let's get all of that bulk out, because medical paperwork is incredibly bulky. And
I think medical paperwork is a really important one to talk about, actually, because it's going to be very dependent on your own circumstances or your family members' circumstances. So I've got clients that I work with have got a 2-drawer filing cabinet just for medical issues, because they've had many issues over the years, and they want a full chronological record of what's gone on in what year and at what time, and so they can refer back to it. And so we'll try and categorize it under the different ailments that they might have. And then you've got other people who have not really got any issues at all, and so it might just be, I can put the whole family into one file that says medical, and that's fine too. So I think, again, how you do your medical filing is entirely up to you, and depends on where you've come from and the issues that you've had, and how confident you are that the authorities or the hospital or the doctor or whatever are keeping your medical records effectively. And that's going to depend on your own journey with that, isn't it, really? And that is something that people need to work out for themselves as to what that medical paperwork looks like.
Yeah, I know, because one of my clients is a carer, and she actually wants to keep all of her appointment letters, because apparently the doctors keep constantly asking her, when did you come in for this and when did you come in for that? And she wants to have that log of those appointments in her paperwork. She finds it really important, while somebody else who might have had a broken arm 5 years ago, and that was it, might not think, you know what, everything is fine, it's all healed, I don't need it anymore, and I now feel ready to shred this paperwork, I don't need to keep hold of it anymore. So I think it really depends on your own personal situation as well.
Yeah. And again, it comes back to this idea of everything being within your comfort zone. So if that's something that's always been a niggle for you along the way, then you're going to feel more nervous about getting rid of things. And there's no keeping things like that. We just have to make sure that we're doing something potentially with that information, that we are going to need it, and that it doesn't become overwhelming.
Yeah.
We've not talked about investments and shares at the moment.
Because I find that paperwork the hardest paperwork, Lesley. I've been trying to...
So you're just ignoring the fact that it exists, then, basically?
No, it's my...
Would you like me to talk about that?
Yes, you talk about it, because I just don't know. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, it's just so much paperwork, and they keep sending you stuff. So of all the paperwork, I must say, I find investments in shares and pension paperwork, for me, the hardest. The rest, I'm like, oh yeah, I can see this is a water bill, and I know what it is, and I know what to do with it. But then all this paperwork from investment and shares and pensions, I'm like, oh no, so bulky. So for me, I find that within paperwork quite hard. So please give me some advice here.
Oh, this is a tricky one now. You're putting me on the line. I think my advice would be, if in doubt, keep it. For sure, yeah. Again, you need to take the bulk out of it, get rid of all the leaflets, get rid of all the, that everything comes in cardboard wallets because it's all fancy from investment people. And so get rid of all that kind of stuff and just keep the absolute thing that you need. Most of these investments, most of these shares are now online. A lot of people have got a financial advisor who deals with that kind of thing as well. And so you can be reliant. You've got a kind of third party involved for the most part as well, even if that's somebody at the bank or whatever. Share certificates, most people, most of the share providers now do have, the share companies, have their own little portals that you can go on and log on and see what you've got. And I believe that you then don't need the share certificates, but I would always keep the share certificates because that's your original proof of what you've had. Mm-hmm. The problem is that if you need your share certificate to cash shares in, that if you don't have them, then they charge you an admin fee. So it's going to cost you if you've not got them. So be really careful. And I think a lot of these shares, if you've got a kind of a reinvestment in your shares scheme and you might get 2 new shares every 6 months instead of taking a dividend, there's another share certificate comes in every 6 months. And so that's why the volumes are so huge, Mm-hmm. Then you've got shares that have been sold, you've got shares that have changed. It's complex and it takes, to be honest with you, it takes some unraveling if you don't quite know where you're at. And so, but sometimes it's worth it because it makes you feel more in control of where you are with the shares. So it involves a few phone calls. And I did a job for a client a few years ago where her husband had bought lots and lots of shares over the years. She had no idea what was going on. Some of them had been sold, some of them had been changed. And we unravelled everything and got to a stage where we got back £3,500 in dividends that had not been claimed. Wow. So it can be a really useful exercise. She had a lot of shares. So that was it. So share certificates you absolutely need to keep. Mm-hmm. Dividend statements of account, if you are self-employed, you need to keep those or employed, actually, you need to keep those as a record because that's income and classed as income, needs to go down on a tax return if you need to make it a tax return every year. So just be very mindful of that. Pension documentation, again, what you've got, the problem with the pension documentation is the names of the pension companies change all the time. And so you're like, oh, what was this? What is it now? And so I think, again, it's worth investing some time in trying to work out, right, okay, which pension is my current pension and which is the documentation that I need to keep. But you absolutely do need to keep it. The other thing that I wanted to talk about actually with that is all these things that we've had over the past few years where people have been suing their financial advisor, well, not suing them, but do you know what I mean? Making claims against their financial advisors for like PPI and mis-selling and that kind of thing. If that's something that you potentially think might happen, it's useful to keep the original, any kind of advice documentation that comes from a financial advisor. But that can be quite meaty. That's a lot of information. So it depends on I think probably, well, I say this, but a lot of that's probably gone now because the financial authorities have got wise to it, haven't they, really? So, but yeah, things like that might need to be kept as well. So that's all a bit dull. Well, it's not dull because we've got investments and shares and that's money. So that's quite nice, but it's complex, isn't it? It's complex. I think it's a little bit scary and that's the thing. And that's why we tend to keep everything. Mm-hmm. But if you've got statements every year from an investment for the past 10 years, you don't need those. You just need to know where you're at the moment. Yeah. So that's where you can be brave. If it's just a 6 monthly statement, get rid of all the others. Yeah.
Okay. All right. You mentioned something, and I thought, then we need to talk about that as well. You kind of said, you talked about the HMRC and tax, and then I thought, HMRC tax, and I thought, pay slips and P45s and P60s. That kind of popped into my head while we're talking. So HMRC paperwork, somebody once wise said to me, you need to keep everything for 7 years. Is that a myth? Is that true? Do we need to? I would say ask advice to somebody. And I mean, I'm self-employed, so I even want to keep it probably a little bit longer than 7 years. But
yeah, I mean, you absolutely. I mean, if you're self-employed, actually, absolutely have to keep everything for 7 years, and you need to work out what the latest tax year is as well. And so so that's really important. I think a rule of thumb is if you're employed on PAYE, then it's 4 years that you need to keep things for. But again, it's going to be pay slips and P60s and P45s. It depends on, lots of people have got online slips. There's an online payroll system that people can log into and find that information. So more often than not, I do find myself getting rid of pay slips now for people because they're quite comfortable to get rid of them. Again, it's like, let me look at my pay slip as it comes in, but I know I can get that information from somewhere else. I'm going to check that I've been paid appropriately this month. But once I've done that and I'm happy with it, I can then get rid of it, because you can always go back to your payroll department. You can always get that information from them.
Yeah.
So don't keep too many, because the volumes of that can grow and grow and grow as well. Definitely keep P45s and P60s, because that gives you then a snapshot of the whole year, doesn't it?
Yeah.
For P60,
yeah.
And I have to get this right now. P45 is the one when you've left employment. So it's really important to keep those as well. But, the HMRC, the one thing that I will, much even though they take money out of our pockets, HMRC are so helpful on their helplines are absolutely brilliant in terms of telling you information, particularly for self-employed people. There's loads of information and courses and everything out there. So, really important to know what your personal situation is with HMRC and get that bit right.
Yeah. And then I think connected to work and payslips is also professional development. I think having a file with your professional development and maybe a CV, maybe letters of recommendation where you've worked, maybe courses that you've done. I think that's all really, really helpful as well. You might not want to keep, your first aid course that you did 10 years ago because it's probably outdated, but other professional development certificates and paperwork is really important to keep. Also, if you're thinking about possibly applying for a new job or trying to go to a higher level within your company, so you probably want to have some professional development paperwork as well. Maybe even you want to have some sort of, if you've done a college or a uni or the things that you've got, your how do you call that? Your diploma.
Degree. We'll get there in the end. I was like, she doesn't know the word for it. I should help her out now. I think we do need to make the distinction between professional development certificates and records and courses. You touched briefly there on courses, and so I literally will go into clients and they've got the Word Perfect course from like 1995 or whatever, and it's like, okay, we need to not do that. That's a different thing, I think. So course paperwork is very different to professional certificates, and whether you want your BAGA award, you probably didn't have this in Holland, did you? BAGA awards, grade at level 4 when you were 10 or whatever. It's whether or not you want those kind of things. Professional development certificates are really important to keep for the reasons that you have mentioned. And also, I'm a bit of a sentimental old fool sometimes, really. And so I've kept records of pay rises, not that I've had many, to be fair, but like the salary that you got when you first started, and then if you got a promotion and things like that. I think that's quite sweet to keep and to see what were you earning back in 1989 or whatever it was. So things like that, but then that becomes more sentimental than anything else, really, I guess. So I think we've more or less covered everything. Is there anything that I've missed, Ingrid?
The only thing I think maybe that is good to mention is that there should be an employment file where people keep maybe their contract with their business, with their company, maybe their appraisal forms, and kind of paperwork like that. So I think that's maybe one of the last ones, I think. I mean, you know what? We can talk another hour and a half about different paperwork, but I think we've got the main categories discussed now. How about you? Have we covered everything, you think?
I think so. Yeah, I think we've covered some great things. So the most important thing for me is, to go back to what we talked about right at the beginning, is to look at your own individual circumstances and work out what's going to work for you. Mm-hmm. Don't get too worried about things. I think people have this worry inside, if I lose that, I'm going to have real problems and so on. But really evaluate that, whether it is going to be a catastrophe if you've no longer got it. So other than that, well, I have loved talking about paperwork. You can see I get all excited and,
Me too. I absolutely love
Good job that some people do, isn't it?
Yeah.
Otherwise they won't be inundated with papers.
I know. I really like paperwork as well. I find it so satisfying to thin out, all these stacks of paperwork and just to kind of go, oh, it's all now ordered and it's all small now and it's all in date order and I can find stuff back. I absolutely love that. And I know it's time consuming, but I think the reward for having it sorted is really, really great. So
I think it allows you to take control back, doesn't it? Out of all the things in your house, I think paperwork is the thing because it has an impact on so many other things.
Mm-hmm.
Your wardrobe has an impact and things like that, but your paperwork have got an impact on your finance, on your, everything, your kind of relationship with your family, everything is, oh, Mom, I can't find this. And you go, oh, God, I don't know where it is, so you've got all that kind of stuff as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all about paperwork, really.
Yeah.
So, well, I really enjoyed myself.
Yeah, looks great. So, listeners, that's it for this episode. And we hope you've all enjoyed listening and are inspired to take action and that you are going to look at that paperwork pile and decide how long you want to keep things and how long you think you need stuff and let some of this stuff go. So thanks for taking the time to listen today. And if you'd like to get more tips and advice, please follow us on social media. And if you don't want to miss the next episode, don't forget to subscribe to the Declutter Hub podcast on iTunes and Stitcher. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Declutter Hub podcast. Check out declutterhub.com for more inspiration and don't forget to tune in next week.